All right, back on the conversation. We've got a great guest for you. Gabriel Acevero is a Maryland State Delegate. He's got an interesting bill I want to talk to him about. It also says that in his bio, that he's the first openly gay Afro-Latino elected to the Maryland House of Delegates. That's fun. The acknowledgement there that there's probably other closeted gay Afro-Latinos elected to the Maryland House of Delegates might also be true. But Gabriel, welcome to the program, brother.
Thanks for having me, Jack.
All right, Gabriel, I like your bill. You are proposing to eliminate school resource officers, right?
Correct.
Yes. But Gabriel, how will we criminalize our kids if we don't have cops there? In all seriousness, tell us why you propose this and the status of it.
Yeah, well, according to the Maryland Department of Education, but also a number of independent studies that have been done on the issue of the school to prison pipeline, but also the criminalization of our children, it continues to show that police in schools have a disproportionately negative impact for Black, Latinx, LGBTQ+, as well as students with disabilities. And so the bill that I introduced, the Police Free Schools Act, would not only ban armed police from being stationed in schools across our state, but it would also redirect state funds that have been used to support SRO programs to the data-proven solutions that will keep all of our kids safe. And that is, investments in counselors and school psychologists, behavior specialists, restorative justice practitioners, people who, in essence, won't see our kids as inherently criminal, and will not continue to perpetuate this school to prison pipeline that siphons Black and brown kids, queer kids, and students with disabilities from the classroom to the jailhouse.
So Gabriel, I love the bill because I have a personal connection to it. Because if we had school resource officers or cops or whatever you want to call them in you name it, elementary school, junior high, high school, I would have definitely been sent to prison. I got into lots and lots of fights, but back then that was called detention. Now it's called we ruin your life. But my guess is it's not my guess based on national stats, but my guess is in Maryland where I don't have the stats, it also disproportionately affects minority groups, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I live in Montgomery County, and according to a study that was done by the Office of Legislative Oversight, although Black students accounted for 1/3 of enrollment in Montgomery County public schools, they accounted for over half of all of its arrests. According to state data, a majority of the arrests, of school-based arrests, were for minor infractions. So in other words, truancy, fighting, non-violent, drug-related offenses. And so we're not just ruining children's lives for minor infractions, but we're disrupting their education, and we're putting them in this perpetual cycle of not just criminalization, but really poverty. And I think it's the civil rights issue of certainly of our time, because it not only relates to education, but it also relates to our criminal justice system. And we can certainly do better, and we can build a system that sees the value in each and every one of our kids, and stop continuing to have a system that criminalizes some of our kids and makes some people feel safe when in actuality, we can be building a system that cares for all of our kids and keep all of our kids safe.
Yeah, so I went to a school that was mixed class, but and mixed in that it was immigrants and Jews and Christians, etc. But it was in a middle class to upper middle class suburb. So ain't nobody going to prison. And so it drives me nuts when people say there isn't racism. So I remember one of the guys, Smitty, nearly broke some guy's neck. Detention. Okay, you can do anything and you weren't gonna go to prison, right? But meanwhile, they're locking up Black kids disproportionately while no one's looking. And it's maddening. So I love that you're trying to do something about it. So what's the status? Is likely to pass, or what's the current situation?
Yeah, so it's been supported by the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability, as we're fighting for a number of police reform measures. Removing cops or SROs from schools is also one of the demands of not just the coalition, but our community. We see a lot of conversation at the congressional level, but also at the state level on a number of police reform measures. And police-free schools have to be a part of that conversation because there is a criminalization, there is a lack of accountability that takes place with SROs in schools. In my own county, a 5-year-old Black boy was not only terrorized, but handcuffed and berated by county police officers. And footage was later released that not only shook our community, but sort of showed what we already knew, which is that criminalization of Black and brown kids are routine, and that police in schools do not keep our kids safe. And so this is part of our larger effort around police transparency and accountability. Another one of the bills that I've introduced called Anton's Law, named for Anton Black, a 19-year-old college athlete that was killed in police custody on the Eastern Shore right here in Maryland, but also introducing a bill to end qualified immunity in state court and to root out white nationalism from law enforcement, which is also a systemic and historical problem. And so this is a part of the conversation. It is a part of really the holistic conversation about police transparency and accountability that extends from our streets to the classroom, and ensuring that we're building a future where Black and brown folks can survive and thrive, and where our babies can go to school and not be criminalized and their education disrupted.
Right. So, but I don't know the Maryland House of Delegates and the overall legislature house broken down. So, but I do know from the national level that just because you have Democrats in charge doesn't mean you're going to pass anything. So they never passed anything. They just gave up on criminal justice reform. So what's the breakdown in Maryland? And if Democrats are in charge, does that really mean anything? Is it going to pass or not going to pass?
Yeah, well, the Maryland General Assembly is democratically controlled. This past legislative session in 2021, we passed a number of police reform measures to include a reforming, not repealing, but a reforming of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, which is a state statute that Maryland was the first state to pass, that other states followed suit, that gives law enforcement officers these procedural protections and privileges that everyday Marylanders and everyday people like you and I do not have. We also passed a statewide use of force standard, a ban chokeholds, duty to intervene, and we set up a sort of an independent investigative and prosecutorial system for these kind of cases. However, I was one of the few Democrats that believe that we didn't go far enough and that we could have and should have gone further. I submitted a number of amendments to include, creating a system where civilians would have greater oversight and control over public safety. Another amendment to root out white nationalism, to end qualified immunity in state courts, similar to what Colorado and New Mexico have done, and Florida is currently debating that right now. And we see that qualified immunity is failing at the federal level with congressional Democrats. But also, as I mentioned earlier, the Police Free Schools Act. So while it is democratically controlled, we have not seen movement, but we're determined. And if it's one thing I know is that the power of the people is greater than the people in power. And so all of the demands that we're calling for, we're going to achieve and ensure that Democrats are accountable to the very people who are impacted.
The Democratic Party is so frustrating. They never mean anything they say. And so, I mean, even the other issue that you touched on there, cops' Bill of Rights, that's not the issue. Cops have plenty of rights. The issue is the people that they're killing and beating up. We got to get them rights. Now, I get it. That Bill of Rights was probably passed a while back and you guys are reforming it. That's a positive thing, but you should repeal it. Cops don't need more rights, extra rights. They already have plenty. Correct. That is definitely not the issue. And of course, Democrats at best with half measures, and it sounds like on your bill, they're not moving it forward. And I've dealt with Maryland before. We try to get the Wolfpack legislation through to call for a constitutional convention to get money out of politics. And nope, powerful people at the last second go, well, We kind of like money in politics. Yeah, that's what we thought. Anyways, yeah, go ahead.
What we know is that there can never be true justice, but there should be accountability. And that's precisely why I've introduced bills such as Anton's Law, bills to end qualified immunity in state court, Police Free Schools Act, as well as a number of other measures. And while we've seen some success over my first term in the General Assembly on police reform measures, there's so much more that we need to do. As you mentioned, we need to repeal, and we did all but repeal the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. We need to set up a system where civilians have greater control over public safety. And that's precisely why I'm running again for the Maryland House of Delegates, is because I recognize that we still have unfinished work of police transparency and accountability. And Democrats are accountable to my community, to Black and Latinx voters who not only give them and sustain their power both at the federal and at the state level, but our love language is policy, and we need to move beyond performative wokeness and all of this, progressive narrative, and ensure that we're pushing through the policies such as the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, even though I'd like to see it go a little bit further, but as well as the Breathe Act, which was proposed by the Movement for Black Lives, that would reallocate funding from law enforcement to community infrastructure and social services. And the reason why that's particularly important, and I believe Democrats shouldn't be shying away from this defund the police slogan, because that's exactly what we are calling for. Look, I serve on the Maryland House Appropriations Committee, and as an appropriator, we know when we say fund, defund, or refund, we are in essence having a budgetary discussion. So let's talk about the numbers, right? Maryland as a state spends more money on policing and incarceration than we do on higher education. As a country, the United States spends around $110 billion annually on law enforcement, more than any other country spends on its military except for China. And so what we see is that we're no more safer, our communities are no more safer, and we're continuing to see instances of police violence. So we have to do something different, and we have to look at the data, and what the data is showing is that we need to shift funding to the data-proven solutions that will keep us safe, such as investments in housing, transportation, economic development, investments in our community and people, so that we not only keep our community safe, but we're addressing crime in a holistic way as well.
All right, look, we're out of time, but I'm gonna address the last thing to the audience. Look, guys, don't get discouraged. There's wonderful young progressives like Gabriel out there, and he's fighting the good fight, and we're gonna eventually win. So we all get frustrated by old corporate Democrats that are intransigent and seem to lack any fire and don't want to take action. But Gabriel, when you talk about the love language, my wife's a therapist, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And it's exactly right. Our language is policy. We don't care about your rhetoric and we don't care about your political theater. Pass the damn bills. Because if we don't pass the bills, we haven't helped anyone other than ourselves, by the way. And so I'm not interested in politicians trying to help themselves. I'm interested in people like you that are actually trying to pass bills. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being a delegate and for fighting for the right things. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.